The rain was falling hard that night, the kind that soaks you to the bone in seconds. Officer Daniel Harper thought it would be another quiet patrol until a little girl burst out of the shadows. Her face pale, her voice breaking as she screamed, "Please, follow me." He didn't know her name. He didn't know why she was alone in the dark, barefoot, trembling. But the terror in her eyes made his heart stop. And in that single moment, every instinct told him if he didn't go with her right now, someone would die. She led him down twisting alleys and into a building that smelled of rust and shadows. Every step echoed with a sense of danger he couldn't explain. And then he saw it. Something so chilling, so impossible that Daniel froze where he stood, realizing too late that this wasn't just another case. This was something far older, far darker, and far more personal than he could have imagined, because the girl who had begged him to follow might not have been alive at all. Rain hammered against the dark, narrow street, turning the pavement into a mirror of fractured light. Officer Daniel Harper pulled his collar higher against the wind as he made his rounds. It was supposed to be a quiet shift, just the usual patrol through the quieter side of the city, but the silence that night felt different. Too heavy. Too watchful. He was halfway down Alder Lane when it happened. A sudden slam echoed from the alley to his right. Daniel's hand instinctively went to his holster, his eyes scanning the shadows. Out of the darkness, a figure burst into view, a girl no older than 11, drenched from head to toe. Her hair clung to her pale face, and her breath came in sharp, panicked gasps. "Please, follow me," she shouted, her voice raw and desperate. Something about the way she said it made his stomach knot instantly. This wasn't the high-pitched drama of a child wanting attention. This was fear. Real fear. He took a step toward her. "Slow down, what's wrong?" "No time," she cried, shaking her head violently. "Shh, you have to come now." Daniel's training told him to radio for backup before following anyone into a situation. He didn't understand, but his instincts. They told him something worse would happen if he hesitated. Her wide eyes weren't just scared, they were pleading, like she'd already seen the end of something terrible. He moved with her as she darted down the narrow alley, her small feet splashing through puddles. The sound of the city seemed to fade behind them, replaced by the muffled roar of rain on rusted metal. "Where are we going?" he asked, keeping his voice calm but firm. She didn't answer. She just kept looking over her shoulder, as if expecting something to burst from the shadows at any second. They turned a corner. Passing dumpsters and cracked brick walls tagged with graffiti, the air grew colder, heavier. Daniel's pulse quickened. He'd been in dangerous situations before, but this was different. There was no clear threat, yet his every instinct screamed one was near. After several turns, they came to a halt before a boarded-up warehouse at the very end of the street. The building loomed over them like a giant made of rust and shadows. A single flickering light above the side door cast a sickly yellow glow. The girl's hands trembled as she grabbed the handle and yanked. The metal screeched in protest, but the door gave way, spilling them into a darkness so thick it seemed to swallow the light. Daniel reached for his flashlight. "Stay behind me," he instructed, but the girl shook her head. "No, you have to see it exactly how I saw it," she whispered. He didn't know what that meant, but he followed her deeper inside. His boots crunched on broken glass. The smell of damp wood and something faintly metallic filled the air. The rain outside sounded distant now, muffled by the warehouse walls. They passed empty crates and rusted machinery. The place had clearly been abandoned for years. Yet every few steps, Daniel caught signs of recent activity: a half-burned candle, a scuffed footprint in the dust, a blanket crumpled in the corner. The girl stopped suddenly. "We're close," she murmured. Daniel's grip tightened on his flashlight. The beam cut through the shadows, revealing a narrow hallway leading to a half-open door at the far end. The girl didn't move. Her voice was barely audible. "This is where I heard them." "Heard who?" Daniel asked. She swallowed hard. "The people who took her?" Daniel's heart skipped. "Took who?" The girl's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't answer. She just pushed the door open the rest of the way and stepped aside. Daniel moved forward cautiously. The room was small, lit only by the pale glow of moonlight streaming through a broken window. The first thing he noticed was the smell, sharp, almost like copper. The second thing was the sound faint, like the slow drip of water. Then, his light found it. A chair in the center of the room, thick rope coiled around its legs and arms, a single shoe lying on its side next to a dark, wet stain on the floor. His breath caught. "Is she still here?" he asked urgently, turning back to the girl. She was, the girl whispered. Before the van came back, Daniel's mind raced. The scene before him screamed abduction, recent, violent, desperate. Whoever had been here was gone now. Maybe not far. Then the girl pointed toward the corner of the room. That's where they put her bag. It's still there. Daniel stepped toward it, shining his light. It was a small, faded backpack pink, with cartoon rabbits on it. The zipper hung open. Inside, he could see a child's sweater, a broken hair clip, and something else. A photograph. He pulled it out carefully. It was a picture of a smiling little girl, maybe 8 years old, with bright eyes and missing front teeth. On the back, written in uneven handwriting, were 2 words: "Help me." Something inside Daniel went cold before he could say anything. A noise echoed from somewhere deeper in the building, a low, dragging sound. The girl's head snapped toward the door. "There. Still here," she breathed. Daniel's training kicked in full force. He drew his weapon, signaling for the girl to stay put. But her hand shot out and grabbed his sleeve. "No," she said fiercely. "You don't understand. If you go in there alone, you won't come back." Ah! Her grip was surprisingly strong for someone so small. Her eyes locked onto his, and for a moment, Daniel saw something in them, something far older than her years. "What do you know?" he demanded in a low voice. She hesitated, her lip trembling. "'Cause I was the one they were supposed to take." The words hit him like a physical blow. Before he could ask more, the dragging sound grew louder. Footsteps followed, slow, deliberate, and coming closer. The air seemed to thicken, and Daniel realized his breathing had quickened without him. Noticing, the girl stepped back, pressing herself into the shadows. "Please," she whispered again, but softer this time. "Follow me, if you still can." Daniel turned his flashlight toward the hallway just as a shadow moved at the far end. It was tall, too tall, and it paused, as if it knew exactly where he was. Then it began to move forward. Every muscle in Daniel's body tensed. His finger hovered over the trigger, his mind calculating distance, angles, exits. But something about the way that shadow moved made his skin crawl. He realized in that moment that he wasn't just responding to a call anymore. He was stepping into something much darker, something that had been waiting for him. And as the figure drew closer, Daniel understood exactly why the girl's first words had been what they were. The shadow advanced, slow and deliberate, each step echoing through the hollow warehouse like a heartbeat in the dark. Daniel's flashlight beam quivered slightly in his grip, cutting a thin path through the blackness. The figure stepped into the edge of the light and stopped. It was a man, or at least shaped like one. His clothes were soaked, clinging to his wiry frame. His face, however, was hidden beneath a black hood. Daniel's eyes dropped to the object in the man's hand, a length of frayed rope, still damp. "Police." Daniel barked, his voice sharp. "Drop it." The man didn't move. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, like he was studying Daniel, or the girl standing in the shadows behind him. Daniel's pulse thudded in his ears. "I said, drop it." Asterisk, the man chuckled, a low, rasping sound that had no humor in it. Then he spoke, his voice hoarse. "You shouldn't have followed her." In that moment, Daniel felt the air shift. He spun toward the girl, but she was going to vanish into the darkness without a sound. "Where is she?" demanded his voice, a mix of anger and alarm. The man's grin widened beneath the hood. "She always runs when it's time." Daniel's instincts screamed, kept his weapon trained, but backed toward the doorway, knowing he couldn't risk turning his back. That's when something brushed against his boot, He looked down. It was another photograph, wet edges curling. He bent quickly and picked it up. The image was of the same little girl from the pink backpack, but this time she wasn't smiling. Her eyes were wide, mouth gagged, a tear sliding down her cheek. Daniel's throat tightened. On the back of this photo, fresh ink spelled out 3 words, "She's still here." Asterisk, he looked up just in time to see the hooded man vanish into the hall. Daniel gave chase, his boots slamming against the rotting floorboards. The corridor twisted and turned, the walls closing in like the ribs of some great beast. The only sound was the rain outside, muffled yet constant, and the faint creak of footsteps ahead of him. He turned a corner and froze. The man was gone, but in his place stood the girl. Her face was pale, almost glowing in the dim light. Her wet hair stuck to her cheeks. She was clutching the pink backpack to her chest. "Where did you?" Daniel started, but she cut him off. "They're below us," she said softly, her voice trembling. "I can show you, but you have to promise not to leave her." Daniel hesitated, or something in her eyes again, that strange, ageless weight he'd seen before. But there was no time to question it. "Show me." She led him to a narrow metal staircase at the end of the hall. Each step groaned under their weight as they descended into the basement. The air grew colder, damp seeping into Daniel's bones. A faint hum vibrated through the concrete, like machinery running somewhere deep underground. At the bottom, they reached a heavy steel door. The girl pressed her ear to it, then looked at Daniel. "They're not moving. Now's your chance." Daniel took a deep breath, steadied his weapon, and shoved the door open. The beam of his flashlight swept across the room and he stopped cold. There, in the center, was the same chair from upstairs. Only now it wasn't empty. A woman sat bound to it, her head slumped forward. Her clothes were torn, her wrists raw from struggling. The gag across her mouth muffled a weak, pitiful sound as the light hit her. Daniel rushed forward, holstering his weapon to free his hands. He pulled the gag away and gently lifted her chin. Her eyes fluttered open, glassy with exhaustion, but then they locked on his face with a jolt of recognition. "You, Harper," she croaked. Daniel froze. He had no idea who she was. "Do I know you?" Her lip trembled. "I was your neighbor. 20 years ago. Before." Her voice cracked and tears spilled down her cheeks. "Before they took me." Daniel's breath caught. His mind reeled back to a hot summer day decades ago, a missing girl from 2 doors down. A search that lasted weeks, and a body that was never found. But she wasn't a girl anymore. She was here, alive. Before he could speak, the girl who had brought him here stepped into the light. Her expression was strange, relieved, but also heavy with something Daniel couldn't name. "You found her," she said quietly. Daniel looked at her, 100 questions fighting to escape. "Who are you?" The girl's eyes glistened. "I'm no one now. I was her sister." The bound woman's head jerked toward her. "No," she whispered, disbelief in her voice. You were a baby." The girl smiled faintly. "I was, but I've been here ever since. I learned the walls, the sounds, the places they hide the keys. I waited for someone to follow me." Daniel's mind raced. "Wait, if you've been here? Why didn't you?" A loud metallic clang echoed through the basement, cutting him off. God. Face hardened instantly. "They're coming." Daniel moved fast, cutting the ropes around the woman's wrists. She collapsed into his arms, too weak to stand. The girl ran to a small vent in the corner and pulled something from inside. A set of old, rusted keys. "This way," she urged. They moved quickly, the girl leading them through a maze of narrow service tunnels beneath the warehouse. The air was thick and damp, the walls closing in around them. Daniel could hear voices, no angry, shouting, getting closer. Finally, they reached a grated door that opened to the outside. The girl shoved the keys into Daniel's hand. "Go. Take her. Don't stop." "What about you?" Daniel asked. Her eyes softened. "I can't leave. Not yet." Daniel wanted to argue, but the woman in his arms was fading fast. he pushed. The door opened and stepped into the freezing rain, the night swallowing them whole. Behind him, the girl's voice called out one last time, "Tell her, I kept my promise." By the time Daniel turned back, she was gone. The next hours blurred, rushing the woman to safety. Backup flooding the scene, the warehouse swarming with officers. But no matter how many rooms they searched, no one found the girl. Days later, Daniel returned alone. The warehouse stood silent, the rain-washed streets giving no hint of what had happened. He stepped inside, retracing their path until he reached the small room with the chair. On the floor near where the girl had stood was a single photograph. It was old, edges curling, colors faded. Two children stood side by side. One was the woman he'd rescued, the other a younger sister with bright, determined eyes. On the back, in the same uneven handwriting as before, were 4 words: "Thank you for following." Daniel stood there for a long time, the rain tapping softly against the broken window, the photograph trembling slightly in his hand. And in that stillness, he realized the truth. She had never been alive. When she led him there, Daniel stood in the dim room, the faded photograph trembling in his hand. The smiling girl beside her older sister was frozen forever in time, yet he could feel her presence as if she were still there. The air was heavy, the silence almost reverent, as though the warehouse itself remembered what had happened within its walls. Rain trickled through the cracked ceiling, each drop hitting the floor with a hollow tap. Daniel's mind replayed every moment of the urgency in her voice, the strange way she seemed to know every corner of the building, the way she disappeared into shadows without a sound. He wanted to believe she had simply slipped away too quick for him to follow. But deep down, he knew the truth. She had been leading him from somewhere far beyond the reach of the living. The woman he'd rescued, her sister, was recovering now. She had told him everything she remembered from that night, 2 decades ago, how she had been taken, how she had heard her baby sister's cries echo through the house before everything went black. She never saw her again. Until that night in the warehouse, Daniel didn't tell her what he'd realized. He didn't tell her about the photograph, or the way the girl's footsteps had made no sound, or how her breath never fogged in the cold air. Some truths were too heavy to speak aloud. Instead, he kept the picture. He kept it because it reminded him of the promise the girl had made. Tell her I kept my promise, and she had. He left the warehouse slowly, the photograph safe in his pocket. The streets outside were quiet now, the rain easing into a soft drizzle. Street lamps glowed in the mist, casting pale halos in the dark. Daniel paused at the end of the block, glancing back one last time. The warehouse loomed like a shadowed sentinel, but it no longer felt threatening. It felt watched over. For a long moment, he stood there, letting the night settle around him. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed, and life went on. But in that quiet space between heartbeats, he thought he heard a child's voice, soft, almost playful. "Thank you for following." He turned quickly, but there was nothing there. Only the faint shimmer of rain in the Sträcklisch. Daniel walked, away without looking back again. Some things, he knew, weren't meant to be chased, and though he had spent his career solving cases, closing files, and bringing justice, this one would never be closed. It would live in the place between waking and dreams. In the echo of footsteps that weren't really there, in the memory of a girl who'd been gone for 20 years, yet still kept her word, because on that night, in the pouring rain, she had asked him to follow. He had, and it had changed everything.